How's it going, everybody? That was weak. How's it going, everybody? That's better. All right, hold on. It's great to be here on this 100th anniversary of federal income tax. I'm sure everyone's excited to talk about that. Exactly. Just to get started, Turning Point USA and the other sites that I write for give me a great voice on the national level to kind of voice my opinion and get out what's happening to the youth in this country. But until recently, I haven't been connected at the local level in really any way. Recently, I met Mrs. Landry at Georgia Guns, and they were excited. She was excited to allow me to come and speak to their group, and they invited me to come back here today. And if it wasn't for a couple people I'm going to name here in a second, I wouldn't be here today. And if it wasn't for their help, I wouldn't be getting connected here like I have been. So thanks to Mrs. Landry, Mr. Fitzpatrick, Mr. Scupin, Mr. Lipscomb, Mr. McBride, and Mr. Hooper, and people that I'm probably forgetting because there are a lot of you. I can't thank you enough. I really appreciate it. Turning Point USA is a group of like-minded high school and college students. We from all over the country, in I think 20 states now. What we talk about is we try to engage the youth concerning the concept of generational theft, and our whole purpose is to tell the youth what is happening to our generation and how our future is being robbed by politicians at every level. We focus on the national debt, and we want to bring fiscal sanity back to this country, and that's why we steer away from social issues. Because when you engage in social issues, you're touching on such hot button issues that people are so passionate about that it's hard to change minds and engage people, especially the youth. Because today's youth have a totally different view of what's happening in the social realm than a lot of people here. So we try to focus on the fiscal because that's where we win people over. And I'm kicking stuff over back here. Please get involved with us. If you have another group, I'd love to come speak to you. My buddy Michael over here in the purple shirt is walking around with flyers that he's handing out. We have some on a table over here. Please talk to us. Please talk to him, and we can get you involved in some way, especially if you are a youth or a parent. We'd love to have your kid involved. But a little bit, I'm going to step away from my fiscal focus for a little while, and I'm going to pose a question to everyone here. Is America still the land of the free? And it really isn't. And if you look at it, the Heritage Foundation ranks the United States 10th in the world in terms of economic freedom. We don't even, with the Fraser Institute in Canada, and in association with the Cato Institute and another institute from Germany that I can't pronounce, ranks the U.S. 7th in terms of civil liberties and social freedom. That is not the land of the free. That is not the shining city on a hill that our founders set up our country to be. This loss of freedom is caused by government expansion in every form, at every level. Government at its core wants nothing more than to gain power. If you don't check your government, they will consistently gain power, and they will consistently erode your rights every chance that they get. And the government must stand for liberties, or for their liberties, or they will see them taken away. Because the government wants nothing more than to maintain control over its people. The United States government has a horrible track record on civil liberties. I don't think we're not as bad as some countries in history, but if you want to talk about what countries are good on civil liberties, I would not talk about the United States. In 1796, this started with John Adams and the Alien and Sedition Acts, where he imprisoned political opponents and supporters of Thomas Jefferson because they disagreed with him. This country interned Japanese Americans for the very fact that they were Japanese, and that a country many of them weren't even born in attacked us. We removed the Indians and gave them no compensation for their land because we wanted it. We passed the Patriot Act, which we need to repeal immediately after 9/11. We passed Obamacare, which is a violation of our choice in health care and our freedom of religion, which I'll talk about a little bit later. We've put into effect the Department of Homeland Security, which does nothing more than infringe on our liberties and and establish a bureaucracy that we can't overcome. And the National Defense Authorization Act, which allows for the indefinite detention of Americans without trial or charge. The government is currently fighting a war on the Bill of Rights, and for a lot of reasons, that's why we're here today. We're here to rally for our Bill of Rights and tell them, no, we like it, we're going to keep it, and there's nothing you can do about it. The First Amendment has been violated through Obamacare and the forcing of religious institutions to support procedures and medications that they don't exactly agree with. That violates freedom of religion. It's erased. There's currently a Fox reporter in Colorado that is being threatened with jail time by a judge over there because she refuses to reveal her sources in a story. And he is threatening to put her in jail for up to 6 months. That's a violation of freedom of the press, and in a lot of ways, freedom of speech. We cannot allow that. The Second Amendment has been attacked with unnecessary regulations and restrictions on law-abiding citizens, and the ATF has led this charge. And let me tell you something, folks. Alcohol, tobacco, and firearms is a better name for a convenience store, not a government agency. And that there's current proposals on the floor of the House or the Senate that wants to place background checks on everybody for every firearms transfer. But the only people that will follow those rules are law-abiding citizens, because criminals aren't dumb enough to go get a background check before they buy a firearm, because they know they won't be able to get it. Now we've kind of moved on to the Third Amendment, which we still have. They aren't forcing people. They aren't forcing us to let soldiers stay in our homes. So let's get a cheer that we still have the Third Amendment around, and maybe the only one. The Fourth Amendment has been completely shredded. The drones, which Rand Paul spoke on for 13 hours the other week, the use of drones over on American citizens on American soil. He couldn't even get a straight answer out of the Obama administration to say if they think it's constitutional or not. Their answer was, well, we haven't done it yet. Well, it doesn't matter if they haven't done it yet. They still have the power to do it, and that's something we should all be concerned about. The Patriot Act and roving wiretaps, a complete violation of unreasonable search and seizure. If a police officer does not have a warrant, he should not be able to search you on any level. You have the right to your property, and a police officer cannot infringe upon that unless you give consent. And the Patriot Act and the roving wiretaps take that away. They violate that right. The TSA. How many of you like the TSA? Anybody? Does anybody here like the TSA? No. Okay, that's what I thought. I don't like them either. But every time you go to an airport, you are unreasonably searched because somebody decided they wanted to commit a terrorist act against the United States. Now, it is no place for the government to enter into an airport and search you without your consent. Security should be left up to the airlines, and if you want to fly on that airline, then we can talk about having to consent to search. But they should have to get a warrant to search you if they are from the government. That is the way our country was set up, and that is the way it needs to continue to be. Right now, the New York City Police Department uses a stop and frisk procedure. What this means is that if they think that you are up to no good on the street, they can stop you and they can search you in the name of public safety and security. This is another blatant violation of unreasonable search and seizure, and it needs to be stopped in that level. And New York State has a horrible track record on civil liberties, and that's just one of them. And then the National Security Agency, which we should also probably shut down today, is building a data center in Utah that will be able to track and record every single electronic communication between individuals, and they will keep it in this data center for an indefinite amount of time without deleting it. That is a complete violation of privacy, and it is a complete violation of the Fourth Amendment. And you need to contact your legislatures today and tell them that we need to stop this building of the Utah Data Center. That's what it's called. It's kind of a boring name. Now we're going to move on to the Fifth Amendment and the National Defense Authorization Act. It denies the right to trial to people and indefinitely detains them. Now, I don't care if you're accused of a crime in the United States. You have the right to trial by jury, no matter what country you are from, no matter why you are here. When you are inside the borders of the United States, you are subject to our constitutional freedoms because they are freedoms granted to all people by the very fact that they exist. It's not something granted to Americans. These are rights granted to us by God. So if you are in this country, your rights granted to you by God apply to you. So it doesn't matter if you're a citizen or not. You cannot be indefinitely detained by the United States government without charge or trial. Eminent domain is another freedom or another restriction on the government that's being abused. The government of the United States and the Supreme Court recently ruled in the case Kello versus the City of New London that the government can step in and take private property in order to give to another private entity for the sake of public good. This is a complete violation of the Fifth Amendment, and in many cases they don't get just compensation for what they are doing. Government should have no authority to take private property from individuals in any case. You should have to consent to giving your private property to them. They cannot take it. Let's move on to the Eighth Amendment and mandatory minimum sentencing. In my view, this is cruel and unusual punishment. If you are committing a non-violent, victimless crime, you should not be punished by the government of the United States, or any government for that matter, because of what you do. Crimes are acts committed against other people or property. Government steps in when you violate someone else's life, liberty, or property, not when you violate your own. And when we have mandatory minimum sentencing, it is punishing people and ruining their lives for something that they're doing to themselves or they're consenting to, and it is wrong. The Ninth Amendment it's kind of an amendment that's been lost to history. People don't really talk about it anymore. It's telling the government that individuals have certain rights that haven't been spoken about in the Constitution, but they exist, and that all individuals will always have them. And things like right to privacy, that is a right guaranteed by the Ninth Amendment. It is a right guaranteed by the very nature of our existence, and it is something that through the Patriot Act, through CISPA, through the proposed SOPA law, that is the type of thing that's violating the right to privacy, and it's a complete violation of the Ninth Amendment. Now to the 10th Amendment. It has been violated in a lot of ways, but the two biggest are the 16th Amendment and the 17th Amendment. The 16th Amendment takes and consolidates gives the federal government a monopoly over the tax system. The 10th Amendment violates the rights of the states to really control their tax system, even though the federal government does have the enumerated power to levy taxes. It doesn't mean that they should in the way that they do. And the 16th Amendment takes away a lot of the state power when it comes to taxes. And the 17th Amendment takes away state representation in the Senate. It takes away. I guarantee you right now that Obamacare would not have passed had the 17th Amendment never been adopted. If we want to bring our country back to our founding principles, we need to immediately repeal the 16th Amendment and the 17th Amendment. That is what will save our country. We need to allow the states to elect their senators and put them in the Senate so the states can have a voice and protect their rights. Now, I think that our future still has a chance, and I have hope for my generation still. A lot of people don't, but I do. Last year, when the government tried to pass legislation through SOPA and PIPA that would regulate the internet and violate our civil liberties, Democrats, conservatives, and libertarians all stood together in stopping the law because we realized it was wrong. My generation and people not much older than I am were the ones that spearheaded that fight. And we stopped the regulation of the internet and the violation of our liberties. And that is something that I believe my generation will stand up. And I do believe it is going to be my generation that that tells the government that we want to return to our constitutional principles. But we can start doing this now. First, we need to elect leaders that respect the Constitution for what it is. We need to elect leaders that will stand up on the floor of the House of Representatives or the Senate or in the White House and say, this is not in the Constitution. Our founders never wrote about it. They never thought it was a legitimate power of government. We don't need to be doing this. That is something that we must do, and it is something we must fight for. And then we need to hold them accountable. We need to tell our representatives when they come back to their districts that they are wrong. We need to let them know that we don't approve of their job. Congress right now has like an 18% approval rating. They have a 90% re-election rate. So people hate Congress, but they love their congressmen. They always think that it's not their congressman doing what's wrong. I'm here to tell you it is. My congressman, Doug Collins, I think he's doing a great job in Washington right now. But he is not doing everything right. And if I ever talk to him, I'm going to tell him exactly what I think he's not doing right. And that's how we should be to all of our congressmen all the time. We need to look at the state as an institution that restricts rights at every chance it gets, and stop looking at it as an institution that is there to help us. When we do this, and we tell the state that we understand what our liberties are, then we can return to the beginnings of this nation and to the Constitution, and that is how we can bring back and save this country. And we need to bring the power back to the state and local governments. We must, when power is returned to the state level and the local level, that is when liberty truly, I can't think of the word right now, when liberty is there. And when that happens, and when people have more control of their government, we will have more liberty. It's a fact. And now we need to start spreading liberty in a positive way. We can't preach to people. We need to talk to people. We need to have conversations with people. At Turning Point USA, we start conversations. And that is what we need to do here. We don't need to stand up and yell at people and tell them why they're wrong. We need to explain to them. We need to avoid hot button issues while we're winning them over. What we need to do is we need to tell them about the fiscal mess that Washington is in and how we can work together to fix it. We need to tell people how they're being robbed by their government and how great individual liberty can be. Telling someone that they can live their own life without someone else telling them how to do it, that is something that wins people over. Being allowed to do as you please as long as you harm no one else, that is what people dream of. And I believe that most every person wants that at some level. And then we need to tell them that nobody's got to stop them from taking what they want as long as they want to earn it. We are not going to hand them anything. But if you want something, it is yours if you earn it. And we need to make sure we prosper. We need to make sure we create a system where that is allowed and where people are allowed to succeed in whatever way they choose. There are three principles that I believe we need to bring our country back. We need to push the principles of liberty, prosperity, and peace. These three principles will make our nation great again. Now, when I talk about peace, though, I don't talk about abolishing the military and rainbows and unicorns. I talk about maybe it's not a good idea to bomb people all the time. Maybe it's not a good idea to occupy other countries. And maybe every rebellion and every conflict isn't something that's a worthwhile cause. There are people out there that do not like the United States of America, and we probably shouldn't be helping them. Egypt is a prime example of that. We need to push charity. We need to show people that we are willing to help them without government. We need to show people that that us as individuals will always be there to help. We need to allow people to make their own decisions in a free market system. I've already said this. Allow people to prosper. If we follow this, and if we allow government to only exist for the purpose of preserving life, liberty, and property, and we allow people to pursue their own happiness, we will be that shining city on a hill again. We will create a more prosperous, a more peaceful, and a more moral world, and we will live in freedom. Thank you. I was glad to be here. God bless you all.
But I'm going to give him one anyway. He is the local coordinator for the Lanier Tea Party Patriots here, and he is also our fearless founder. The guy was conservative before conservative was cool, and he is on the front lines fighting for you at the Gold Dome all the time, talking to your legislators, making sure that we get some good things done. Please welcome Mike Scupin.
For being here today. It's really good to see you folks showing up and supporting your local Tea Party, and I do thank you for that. Today our nation is in trouble. We need men like those existed in the 16 and 1700s. Men like our founders in the Black Robes that understood who they were and what their God required of them. That it was not only their responsibility but also their obligation to stand before the people and their congregations and speak truth against tyranny. We the people. Why did Madison start the Constitution with that phrase? Why not we the representatives of the 13 colonies? We the people. What is really significant about that phrase? We the people. Did this have a special meaning to the Founding Fathers? If you spend time studying the writings of the founders, you will soon conclude that they used very specific language in writing the Declaration and the Constitution. We the people of the United States, in order to form a more perfect union. From this beginning, we see that the founders had a particular goal in mind. We the people, to secure the blessings of liberty to ourselves and our posterity. These men meant for us to live in a free society. We the people, to understand our founders and their ideas, we must look back into history. And not just American history, but way back into the history of England, the country to which the founders all belonged prior to the Declaration of Independence. We the people. To understand what this phrase meant to the founders, we must travel back in time to 1215 and the Magna Carta. It was here that the idea of we the people originated. King John had decided to get very creative and began to pass laws that violated the people in England's civil rights. The barons came together and developed a document that insisted that King John sign the Magna Carta. Out of this document came the concept of we the people that was to become so important to the founders that it was insisted that it be made a part of the Constitution. When the Magna Carta, what did the Magna Carta do to become so important? Over time, it established the idea that the king could make laws, but there exist limits to what he could decree. And who had the power to set those limits? The people. The Magna Carta established the concept that limits do exist on what government can do. It took years for this fact to come to full force, but it did after many court cases where the people, via the jury, refused to convict. When the law of the king violated the natural God-given rights of the people to be free, they simply refused to convict the person being accused. When we look at our Constitution, we see that the articles set the limits on the federal government. But it's in the first 10 amendments where we see this special idea that was established in the Magna Carta, that it is the people that hold the power. In all 10 amendments, in the Bill of Rights, in one form or another, we see either the rights of the people or we see a reference to the jury. The reasons these were demanded to be put into our Constitution was to be certain that the central government being created understood that power remained with the people and the states. References in the Bill of Rights to the jury and the rights of the people clearly show that the intent is for all final power to rest in the hands of the people, not Congress, not the President, not the Supreme Court, but we, the people. In today's culture, the idea that the jury holds real power has almost been obliterated. It took many years and many court cases after 1215 for the full force of Magna Carta to take effect in England. But over time, the concept that a jury has the right and duty to judge both fact and law came into being. This concept went a long way toward eventually eliminating England's monarchy. Juries began to convict. Juries began to refuse to convict when their peers were arrested and charged with a crime based on a law the people did not believe was right. They did this even when it was obvious the law had been broken by the person. If the law was unjust, the juries refused to convict. Our founders clearly understood that juries have the right to judge both fact and law, and wanted to be sure that the jury would have the final say as to whether a law was to be obeyed. The founders never intended that the central government would establish the courts to have final authority. Instead, it was their intentions for the final authority to rest in the hands of the people. The idea of the founders was to have 5 sources with power to veto that went against the laws of nature and of nature's God. Those 5 points of veto power are the House, the Senate, the President, the Supreme Court, and yes, the jury. Today, it is taught that juries only have the right to judge facts and not law. You will even hear judges state that it is only the job of the jury to determine guilt or innocence based on the evidence presented, and that the court will determine the law. That places any society at the mercy of those making the laws and sets the people up for slavery, just as it did during the times when the king's laws had to be obeyed prior to the advent of the Magna Carta. There are a number of court cases that reflect this, and those we could discuss. But today our goal is to bring back to the minds of the people that the power is ours. The power has always been ours. But as often happens, you do not have power until you exercise it. I want you to keep in mind a very important aspect here. What you don't know about your history will make you a slave, or worse, it can make you dead. In the late 1800s, a movement began which was called the Progressive Movement, and this movement quickly realized that unless they could eliminate the power of the people, it would be very hard to implement their agenda. So they began in the late 1800s to set the stage that would prevent the people from having the right to judge both fact and law. Fortunately, people are now learning about this right of the jury to judge both fact and law. It is here where we come to terms with why the founders began with "we the people." They fully understood that it is the job of the people to keep a check on government, just as the people had to do in England to take back their God-given freedoms from the king that was attempting to usurp them, just as our government is doing today. In this past Georgia legislative session, Representative Charles Gregory tried to introduce a law that would require judges to tell people that juries have the right to judge both fact and law. By the way, he is a lawyer. He understands that we have that right. That's why he's trying to make the judges tell us about it. His bill did not make it this time, but as more people learn of this truth, hopefully enough legislators will get on board and help the people take back this portion of our rights that have been stolen by the lawyers and the judges in the progressive movement. State sovereignty and the concept of the right of juries to nullify bad law are interrelated. The right of the people to judge both law and fact derives from the idea that we acquire certain God-given rights at birth from our Creator. Because we have these specific rights, we have the power to delegate them to others to enforce them for us if we desire. And just because we delegate some of them does not mean that we give up our right to them just because we have given them to someone else. For instance, because I have a God-given right to self-defense, I can delegate that right to my sheriff to protect me. But that does not mean that I give up my right to self-defense just because I have asked my sheriff to also defend me. Another example would be just because I see one of my neighbors has 3 cars and another of my neighbors has none, I do not have the right to go to my neighbor that has 3, take one of his cars and give it to the neighbor that has none. Neither can I transfer that right to my government if I don't have it. When the states came together to form the central government, the states and the people could only give to the central government power that actually belonged to the states and to the people. The states decided to give specific and enumerated powers to the central government. The states drew up a compact agreement, which we refer to as our Constitution. Keep this one fact in mind when you look at the Constitution with an eye toward where the founders believe power should reside. And if you don't hear anything else I say today, please listen to this. These men, the founders, had just fought a war against government tyranny. Do you think in your wildest imagination that they ever intended for the central government that was being created to wield the amount of power that it currently wields today in our nation? Early in our history, the central government tried to overstep its limits, and the founders on numerous occasions wrote documents and other papers explaining that it was the duty of the states to stop the central government whenever it overstepped its limits. The concepts by which the states were expected to do this are nullification and interposition. This in its simplest form means the states ignore and refuse to allow the implementation of the unconstitutional laws that central government elicits. Our entire system of government was originally based on Judeo-Christian principles. The idea that government can and often does overstep its boundaries by moving into tyranny comes out of the same Judeo-Christian concepts. A lot was written about separation from the mother country prior to the Declaration of Independence, but most of it fell on deaf ears. One major factor that helped turn the tide toward freedom from tyranny and separation from the mother country was a group of men that came to be known as the Black Robes. These men understood that God had always intended his people to be free. They were courageous enough to stand in their church pulpits and preach God's words of freedom, knowing that they were putting their very lives in danger with the rulers of their day. Where are those shepherds today that are willing to stand in the churches against a federal government that recognizes no bounds on its power and what it can impose on the people? Where are those in the pulpit today that are standing against all the transgressions being perpetrated on the people? Where are these leaders? Our elected officials today swear to uphold and defend the Constitution of the United States. But when the central government violates the Constitution, why do these men and women fail to take a stand against tyranny? What is needed today are men and women, pastors, governors, and legislators to come together and tell the usurpers of our God-given rights that we have had enough. It's all up to us, our churches, our governors, our legislators, and we the people must stand together and demand that our central government cease to make us slaves. We will prevail. With God's help, we will turn this nation around. We the people are rising up. We are demanding that our governors and legislators honor their oaths of office and nullify unconstitutional laws and interpose the state of Georgia between a tyrannical, out-of-control government and the people. I hope that from this day forward, you will see the Bill of Rights in the same light as did our founders. Thank you.